Well, good evening. Welcome to the Last Tackle studio here on the Sportsman Rugby League. Alongside me for the next half an hour or so, Andrew Henderson and Paul Sculthorpe. And gents, a week of surprises in the Betfred Super League, Hendo. Some results that I think a few coupon busters, a few things that people didn't see coming.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a fantastic round of rugby league football, and as you said there was some surprise results. Again, we're starting to see, the dominance of Hull Kingston Rovers as they sit top of the table. But again, it's interesting now how that dynamic of the top six is starting to evolve. Also, the teams in the bottom of the table, how that's taking shape as well. But once again, there was some interesting results which we'll discuss in just a few moments' time.
It feels like it's been a bit of a Rubik's Cube of a season, Scully. Every time you think that there's patterns and form developing, it just seems to shift again.
Yeah, it does, and it's what we want to see, isn't it, Lewis? You want to see. You don't know, what's going to happen, and it keeps the competition alive. And I say, other than Hull KR, sitting pretty at the top, they've been outstanding again. Dominant win over Castleford, but underneath, it's still all to play for.
Yeah, we'll talk about that game first. Thursday night, Hull KR beating Castleford. Scully, we talk every year about that cup final in the middle of the season, and it kind of being a real line in the sand sometimes for the teams that are involved. Well, Hull KR are showing no sign of slowing down.
I think it's probably worked the opposite for them. I think it's finally got them over the line with a trophy. I think it's shown what a quality side they've been for the last 2-3 years, and never managed to turn it into silverware. Now they really believe that they're the team to beat, and they are.
Perhaps the most impressive thing about Hull KR, I think, Hendo, watching them this season is the intensity at 60 minutes in is still so close to what it is. There doesn't seem to be a drop-off point with them this year.
No, and one thing I have picked up with Hull Kingston Rovers is they start fast. They start fast, they come out, they generally score first, they're generally scoring in the opening 10 minutes, and then they're almost challenging you to come and chase them down. And again, when you look at the back end of games too, they score a lot of points in the final 30 minutes of a game as well. So as that ties into what you're saying there, Lewis, about they maintain those standards of intensity right throughout the 80 minutes. But they're a formidable side at the moment, and Scully touched on it there. I think they've been building over the last couple of seasons, and I think they're a genuine title contender this year. I think getting the trophy win at Wembley has just took that little bit of a monkey off the back, so to speak, because there was a little bit of pressure and expectation on them for how they've grown over the last couple of years to now start winning silverware. They've done that, but what I've been most impressed with is the response since Wembley. They just seem to be continually to grow and go through the gears, and we saw that certainly on Thursday night when they ripped Castleford apart.
I think you can see. Sorry, Lewis. I think you can see. Their performances come through attitude. And maybe that's another thing that they've pinpointed Willie Peters after Wembley. Don't let that define your season now. Let's kick on and do that. And I think performances, as you say, are backing that up. You look at the spine of the team. Jeslett and Mikey Lewis. Jack Broadbent for me is one of the outstanding players in Super League at the moment. Really stepped up this year. They just look a confident side.
Yeah. I was just going to say, it's going to be that 4 points at the top in terms of the league leaders' shield at the end of the season. That feels like a big gap this year. Sometimes you talk about 4 points, you go, well, it might shift in a weekend. It could still, but it does feel like a big gap.
Yeah, it does. It feels a big gap because you wonder who's going to peg them 4 points back against Hull KR. Where they're going to drop points. So it's exciting. It's exciting, but the business end is yet to come.
And a quick word on Cass.
Sure.
Always a bit of a free hit against that Hull KR juggernaut. I actually don't think they were too far off it. I just think they came up against a very good team on Thursday.
Yeah, they come against a very good side, but they'll be bitterly disappointed because I think we saw some encouraging signs from Cass the week before. They got a great win against Hull FC, and I think probably came into that game with a little bit of confidence back at home that they could deliver another level of performance to that standard. Maybe that may not have been good enough to get the result, but I think certainly the coaching team there will be disappointed, and the playing group will be disappointed in the manner they lost. I mean, yes, Hull Kingston Rovers are flying high. They're a great side. They're well balanced. They've got strike everywhere. We know that. They're sitting where they are for a reason. But I think Castleford would have, like I said, took a lot of encouragement from the week before. And I think that'll be the disappointing thing for them is they have failed to deliver that level of consistency throughout this season. And they had an opportunity to go and deliver a back-to-back performance, and they couldn't do that. But for me, 48-0, it's a drumming at home. I thought there were some encouraging signs when Joe Westerman came off the bench. I thought he seemed to sort of, ask a few more questions, and they looked a more threatening side, with the ball in hand. But obviously defensively, too often and not throughout that game, they were lacking with their contact in tackle management. Few defensive errors on the edges too cost them some points. So, yeah, plenty to work on for the Tigers.
Moving on to Friday, what a night that was. 2 absolutely fantastic games. We'll start with St Helens, Scully. From a Saints perspective, beating Leeds is always important anyway. It's it's a famous rivalry. But how big of a 1 result and 2 performance was that for Paul Wellens, and at this point of the season as well, when, as we've mentioned, that top 6, that top 4 picture starts to take place.
Especially when there's been a lot of talk of Saints not beating those teams above them for a long while. So I think, again, talking of monkeys off the back, that's one thing I put in the column this week is that's gone now. Nobody can say that. And Leeds, they're riding high. They're 5 in a row. They're sat third in the Super League. It was a massive win for Saints. It was a proper Saints performance, as in effort, attitude, led the way with defence. Defence was awesome. I had a beer with Wello on Saturday, and you could just see the glow in him, after that performance. Because you look at the injuries that they've got, and they've got some serious players out, but the lads who've come in, and it was one, the key people, your Walmsleys, your Morgan Knowleses stood up and led that defence, and for only Leeds to score 1 try in the form that they've been in was an exceptional performance.
Whatever happens for the rest of the season, St Helens, yes, a club that demands silverware, but whatever happens between now and October, the production line side of things from a Saints perspective and the players that have come through this season, there will always be an element of success around this year, I think, because of that.
Yeah. And do you know what? And some of it is forced on Wello to put these boys in because of injuries, but geez, they've not let them down, have they? I think they got it last year with Harry Robertson coming through. What a player he is. I think he's somebody who can go to the very, very top of the game. Great performance again from Owen Dagnall, both in backfield carry and obviously doing what wingers do best of scoring points. But just that conveyor belt of young players. George Whitby obviously missed a game with an HIA, but you look at the talent coming through, and hopefully the club's in good hands for years to come.
Hendo, just a word on Leeds. A stumble for them at a time when it looked like they were really starting to build some form and momentum. It doesn't feel like it's a major kind of setback for them at this stage of the season with what's to come, but they will be looking to put that right quickly, because they've been working up towards that top 3, top 2, haven't they? Yeah,
I think they've been progressing really, really well this season, Lewis. Defensively, I think it's been evident to see there's been huge improvements from that side of the game. They're currently just conceding, I think, just over 12 points a game. I think they're the second best defensive team currently in the competition. So you can see the influence that the coaching team have had on the playing group and the mindset that they have now to their defence. And I think that's got them across the line in a number of games. I think they'll still be working on their attack and trying to have the ability to score more points. But overall, they're in a good position. And like you said there, Lewis, they've been building and progressing nicely. They've been sitting around that top 3. I think they've maybe gone into 4th now. I think Leigh might just be ahead of them now. But they're in that top 4, and they've established themselves there on merit and through working well and working for each other. I think we've seen Jake Connor having his best season so far this year. I think since playing in the halves, he's really found a home there. He's making some really smart decisions with the ball. His kicking game's been good, and he's competing off the ball as well. And I'm really pleased to see that, because I think he's one of those players who everybody's recognised his talent over the years, but he's just never been able to get that consistency in his performance. I think we're now starting to see some consistency and maturity in Jake Connor, which is great for the Leeds Rhinos. But you're right, a little bit of a stumbling block for them this week. Full credit to St Helens, and it's great to see them, getting back on track there. And I think Scully touched on it, showing that they can still beat the teams above them. But for Leeds, I don't think it's going to be too much of a defining moment in their season. I think it's not a major setback, and like you said, they'll be aiming to bounce back this week.
On to the most eye-catching result of the weekend, Wakefield getting over Wigan. We'll talk about the Wigan element of it shortly, because it is significant, but I think firstly we just have to pay credit to Wakefield. But it doesn't really come as a surprise, does it? To anyone who's kind of watched them a lot this year, the fact that they can knock off the top teams with big performances, it's not a massive shock. They have been very good.
No, they have. I think that Wakefield team has a lot of confidence and belief in them. And I think we've touched on this before. The fact they had a season in the championship where the core of that team has had an opportunity to come together. build some cohesion, some continuity and confidence through performances. Obviously, they won the championship at a canter. It's then set them up coming nicely into Super League with then adding the quality of McMeekin, Johnston, the likes around what was already a good core side. And we've seen some really strong performances from Wakefield this season. You could argue an element of inconsistency at times. They've probably slipped up on a few occasions and whatnot. They haven't been able to get that maintenance of just winning performances back to back consistently, but they've been in the mixer, and I certainly feel that any team coming up against them are wary of the threats that they possess. And for Wigan, obviously on Friday there, they come unstuck against, again, a very good Wakefield side. And once again for Wakefield, great that they were able to bounce back after the home defeat to Leigh the week before.
From a Wigan perspective, Scully, is there just a slight cause for concern here that the warning signs were there the week before, scraping past Huddersfield? To then go and be off the money again against Wakefield, as we've said, there's no disgrace alluding to this Wakefield team, but they hadn't corrected some of the stuff that they maybe needed to.
Yeah, I think so, and as you say, it's no disgrace losing to Wakefield away. It's always a tough place to go, and that maybe shows that Wigan at the moment are mentally not on it. And like you said, coming off a poor performance, but be it they got the winner over Huddersfield. But Wigan have had a big year all round. Starting off with obviously the Vegas and everything else, and there's going to be dips throughout that season. And I'm sure Matt Peet's got this all in hand, that you've got to peak at the right time, and maybe this is just a time that that we're going to have a bit of a lull in their performances. Maybe a touch of fatigue or mental fatigue. But Wigan are always going to be there or thereabouts, and it's interesting to see the two tries that Wigan did score come from them two, of Jaifield and Bevan French. They just use class, don't they? And you wonder whether a lot of what Wigan do has to come through them too.
I think there's an interesting dynamic to this now of we get to see Wigan as the chasers out and out. They've obviously only been 2 points behind Hull KR until this point, pretty neck and neck, but now it's a 4-point gap. We spoke about that feeling quite a big gap, Scully. I think there's a really interesting sort of narrative to this now of how does Matty Peet deal with being the chasers? How does that team deal with not being leading from the front? Because that's what we've seen them do 2 years in a row.
Yeah, that's it, because we've seen in the last couple of years, haven't we? We're going to have led from the front all the way, but now they've got work to do in catching Hull KR. How much focus they'll put on League Leaders Shield, I don't know. I don't know what Matty's interpretation to his team on that is, and they'll the old cliche of one game at a time and focus on that, because you can't look past the next team in front of you. But I'm sure Wigan will want to win that League Leaders Shield, but there's definitely work to do, certainly the way Hull KR are playing.
Yeah, and that's what makes the competition so good, doesn't it? And that's what makes competition healthy. The fact that it's really, really difficult, it's really hard to be at the top year on, year out. When you are the top dog, everybody's trying to find new ways of how can we get you, and how can we outfox you and catch you and whatever. And at the moment, Hull KR are sitting pretty, but there's still 12 rounds to go. There's still 24 points up for grabs. There's plenty of twists and turns to come. I'm sure we've seen plenty on the weekend, as we're discussing at the moment. We've seen plenty already throughout the year. And I'll tell you something regarding Wigan, a team that has been able to come through adversity and still go on and win things. They've done that plenty of times, so they've been there before. They know how to turn things around. I think, as Scully said, a little bit of a blip in the season. A lot of teams will go through periods of that. We haven't really seen that yet from Hull Kingston Rovers, who for me are in a really good vein of form. But will it come at the back end when they don't need it? Who knows?
Yeah.
There's so many different factors that contribute to that. Injuries to key personnel, confidence, distractions away from the club. There's so many variables that can impact or turn the fortunes of a season around. So it's exciting to see how this dynamic unfolds as we come into the second half of the year, Lewis.
Yeah, and as you mentioned that second half of the year, I think the interesting thing when you do talk about that top spot, Hendo, is it's a 4-point gap at the moment. Well, that can easily become 2 at any point in the season. They don't play each other, Hull KR and Wigan, until I think it's September. It's quite late on in the season that we meet them again.
Good point.
Massive night that could be.
Yeah.
I really hope it is. I really hope we have one of those nights we look back on that Ryan Hall moment and the trophy and the helicopter and all of that kind of thing. I don't think it's not the last round, so it's not going to be quite as dramatic as that, but it could set us up for something wonderful, couldn't it?
Yeah, it could do. I know. I mean, Hull KR do have that little slight advantage at points difference. They've just probably got the edge as well, so that's effectively almost another 2 points for them at the moment as well. It means they'd have to lose 3 and we're going to have to win 3 to jump them type thing. But look, I think you're right. I think there's plenty of excitement through the competition, not just through the top 2, who's going to make up the top 4, who's going to make up the top 6. I think we can sort of know who's going to be finishing around the bottom of the table, but there's still plenty to play for loads of these teams in this competition.
Onto the side of the fixture, a team that definitely have a lot to play for. Warrington's woes continue. It was a really interesting game, I thought, the one against Huddersfield. If you were talking about it's a horse race, Warrington probably just needed an extra furlong because they actually kicked on quite strongly in the last 10 minutes. But there's just something, a huge amount of energy I think was spent on that cup final.
Agreed.
There's just something that's not quite there for the full 80 minutes. I think in pretty much every game this season they've shown bits.
Yeah.
I guess the question for Warrington and Sam Mando is how do you apply that across an 80-minute period?
Yeah, well, I think, look, we're going back to that word consistency again, aren't we? And Warrington have failed to be consistent for long enough periods in games, and unfortunately for them, it's meant that they've lost too many games. I think, as you highlighted there, Lewis, they invested a lot of energy, emotion into that Challenge Cup final, and for me, were the better team on that day. No doubt about that, and I think the disappointment of that, and I think that was their best performance of the season, the Challenge Cup final by far. But obviously, it came at a loss. Not only the fact that they emotionally were probably destroyed from that because they really lifted and rose, but they also lost a couple of bodies too through injury, notably Matt Duffy, who's one of their pivotal players at the back with that fractured eye socket. And I think that's probably been one of the key issues for Warrington this season. When you look at their squad, they've had a number of injuries to key personnel. They've had to move the pieces a lot, throughout the season. And Scully will probably attest to this. It's really difficult and really challenging when you're trying to find consistency in performance, when you lack that continuity and cohesion, especially with your spine players as well. And I think we've seen a lot of disruption to Warrington. It's not an excuse, because that's where other players have to step up and deliver, and even if they're playing out of position, have to deliver to a certain level, but because that's what's expected of you as a Super League player. However, it certainly doesn't help when you are lacking that continuity within your playing group to be able to build performances and grow them. When you're chopping and changing every week, it does affect certainly like I said, the cohesion and also the confidence.
I was going to make a similar point about Huddersfield because we should pay them credit for that performance and that win.
Yeah.
And they've probably had it as bad as anyone with injuries this season, Scully. This sounds like such an obvious question, but coaches will obviously put plans in place and work out ways of mitigating for losing certain players and certain positions throughout the season. How hard is it as a squad when you get hit so hard?
Definitely.
Everything that you've done in pre-season, every plan you've put in place pretty much goes out the window.
Because, ultimately, and depending on the size of squads, and you're probably going out there with players that you didn't intend on playing Super League this year, be it some of the young kids coming through who are maybe not ready, but they're the next best in line. And it's difficult, and obviously, Huddersfield have, as you said, been suffering with some horrendous injuries, all year, but really starting to show a bit more, I don't know, honesty and what have you through. A bit more fight. And confidence as them players are coming back, and nearly, as you say, nearly beat Wigan, and then a great win for them over Warrington. It'll be interesting to see where they can go from here.
Moving on, Leigh keep their top 4 charge very much alive. There was some improvement from Catalans, but from a Leigh perspective, Hendo, I don't know why we keep almost sounding surprised about this, because they've been in Super League, back in Super League 3-4 years now. Every year there's been continuous progression. Let's start talking about them. Like, they're a seriously good side.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny because I was over watching them a couple of weeks ago and they're at Hull KR, and I looked at the team sheet. That's a decent side that's coming out this week against Hull KR, and but they just against self-destructed. They're in a tough place at the moment, Catalan. They really are in a dark place. I feel for them. I think as a club we've seen some incredible performances from them over the last few seasons, and we've obviously spoke previously about the Steve McNamara legacy and the impact and influence that he's had on that club, and how they've progressed and they've won silverware, they've played in major finals, and there's still a lot of the core players from those eras that are still there, and they've obviously made some new signings to add to the mixer, but for whatever reason this year the dynamic within that group is not quite working. I can't put my finger on it personally because I'm not involved there, but the dynamic there is not quite working. Obviously the coach has stepped aside and things haven't improved. They've actually got worse. They went three games or 4 games where they failed to score a point, and they conceded on average over 40 points a game. Like, that's not the Catalan Dragons we've come accustomed to over recent season. Don't get me wrong, I think certainly we saw a little bit more encouraging signs, whether that was Sam Tompkins being back in the team and having some of his influence there and his leadership. I'm not too sure. There was certainly there were encouraging signs on the weekend against Leigh, an improved performance, but certainly still nowhere near the level of performance that we come to expect from Catalan, Lewis.
In terms of Leigh, Scully, they're going to be playoffs again.
Yep.
I'm almost certain of it. They're going to be probably a bit more streetwise, probably a bit tougher for having gone through the playoffs in previous seasons.
Yeah.
Look, we're just over the halfway point, very easy to get carried away, but probably the team I would least want to play in a one-off game. If they can maintain this till the end of the season, they're going to be very dangerous.
They are. They're such a competitive side. I like everything about Leigh. I like, the set up on and off the field. And as you say, they're such a tough team to play. They're a very, very competitive side. They're a side who are probably difficult to analyse for coaches, pre-game and learn how they play, because they like to throw the ball about. They like to play what's in front of them, and they're a team I'd love to watch. And we still refer to Leigh as this team who are now back in Super League, but you say they've been back in 3-4 years now and have competed every year. So they're definitely a team that are up there to challenge for silverware.
I agree. I think they've gone under the radar a little bit too. I think they've just kind of quietly been going about their business. Everyone's been talking about Hull Kingston Rovers and how they're going. People talk about Wigan, and it's the top 2 battle and all that. The improvement of Leeds. Leeds has got a bit of attention, haven't they, this year, because the improvements that they've made. And everyone's seemed to have just sort of not been speaking about loud. I think they'll like that, because they are just going under the radar.
I think that's very much the thing with Wakefield as well. I think, with no disrespect, the clubs that probably don't feel the pressure of the need to
the
expectation
is not there.
Just go under the radar and control your own job.
I think Hull have almost come from the other side of that, haven't they? Because we were having this conversation 2-3 years ago when OKR first got into the Challenge Cup finals, that first started sort of bothering the playoff positions. You say, there's no pressure on. Do it consistently 3-4 seasons, all of a sudden that pressure arrives, doesn't it?
Correct.
So I guess that is the next step for Leigh, is that there will come a point where that pressure arrives, because you then expect them to. I think probably one of the reasons that Leigh have gone under the radar a little bit is because there was such a change in terms of personnel this season. There had so many ins and outs that you kind of almost felt like it was a new start.
Yeah.
They were a playoff team last season. They were 80 minutes away from a grand final, but it was a completely different squad. That's maybe why. We'll move on, because we need to move on to other things. Hull FC versus Salford now. We're recording this at 2 o'clock. There's loads going on at Salford at the moment, I believe. There's talk of this bridging finance. There's some HMRC deadlines supposedly being dealt with today. So I think by the time this goes out in a few hours' time, if we go into it in too much depth, it may well be out of date. 5 more signings have come in, strengthening the ranks of Paul Rowley, so maybe some signs of hope for them. We'll talk about Hull FC. Big 2 points really in the context of the last few weeks and that dip in form, Hendo.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think they would have been disappointed with the loss to Cass last week, and I think that just again probably epitomises where Hull FC are at the moment. They are they're having a decent season, a much improved season from last year, as we know. We certainly have spoke previously about the recruitment that they've made. I think those senior players have made a big difference to that team this year. There's no doubt about that. And they've definitely got a level of consistency with their performances and some confidence. I've been impressed with Rapana. I've been impressed with Aidan Caesar this year. I think them two have had a massive value to that team and that organisation. And I think the fact that they lost last week to bounce back in the form that they did with a comprehensive win over Salford, I think just re-epitomises to me that they're a good side this year, and they've definitely got every chance of making the playoffs.
Just before we start looking ahead, the weekend coming is the last weekend before the leaderboard for the Steve Prescott Man of Steel rankings goes blind. So from this point on, we won't know who's at the top. We won't know who's getting what points until the awards get given out at the end of the season. We'll just have a quick look at how it sits. Jake Connor at the top on 21, Herman SA behind him on 16 points, Jay Field at 13, Jay Field 15, apologies, Aidan Caesar 13, Mikey Lewis 12. Scully, I know this award, you know it pretty well. There's some names in there that I don't think many people would have said will be the top 5 come the halfway point of the season. Most notably, we've mentioned him earlier on, Jake Connor clear at the top.
Yeah, I think I know mentioned about Jake Connor's season. It seemed to there's a bit more discipline in his game this year, and no doubt that's to do with his coach and instilling that attitude in him. Because we know he's a talented player, but he spoilt his game with the other things that he did, which meant he wasn't consistent. And then points show for themselves that he's been consistent this year. And you always expect to see halfbacks, key players, nines, those who touch the ball more than anybody else to influence games. Hence picking up the 3 points of the Steve Prescott Man of Steel points. So it just shows you what season SASA has had. He's been instrumental, hasn't he, for Hull FC, and a lot of what they've done and the turnaround in performances has come through him. For a front rower to be in the mix there with key individual spine players is a massive effort.
He's been devastating, hasn't he? Like, some of his carries have been outstanding. He's making good go forward, winning quick play the balls. He's the top offloader in the competition alongside Pango Jr. from Catalan, and I think he's scored a few tries. He's had a few tries to his name as well, so he's
enjoying himself.
He's been outstanding.
Big weekend of rugby league on the way, and we have got action for you right here on the Sportsman Rugby League. Yeah, join us on Sunday. Should be a cracker, this. Wigan Warriors versus St Helens in the Betfred Women's Super League here on the Sportsman. Scully, Saints versus Wigan, Wigan versus Saints. It needs very little introduction. What are these games like to play?
Oh, they're fantastic. I don't think they get any bigger derbies in rugby league. I know the guys at Hull will disagree, but for me, Saints Wigan is the biggest rivalry within the sport. Be it academy, women's, men's, and both teams will be desperate to win. And Saints will obviously be looking for a response from that Challenge Cup final defeat.
And it is credit to the job that Dennis Betts and his team behind the scenes have done at Wigan that we can go into that game as favourites. It's great for the profile of the Women's Super League, isn't it, that derby is there now as a real competitive game.
It is, and I think it's brilliant that Wigan have improved so much the way they have, that it's another team there, competing at the very top for silverware, and that's what we want to see. More competitive games throughout the women's league, and looking forward to watching this one.
Right, on to the action in the men's Betfred Super League this week, and I tell you what, it's an intriguing week of games. I know I probably say that every week, but straight off the bat, Friday night, a contender for game of the round. Hendo, Leeds Rhinos versus Leigh Leopards.
Yeah.
Fascinating game.
It's a great game, isn't it? A really great contest. So much looking forward on this one. The Rhinos, as we know, obviously coming off the back of disappointment last week, they're back at home. They're going to want to put on a show for their fans. But the Leopards, again, they're in a good vein of form themselves. They'll want to keep building and growing and build off the back of their back-to-back results against Wakefield and Catalans. So I think both teams, when you look at them, I think both teams probably not scoring enough points at the moment. They're probably both just averaging over 20 points a game at this stage. They probably both want to both be looking to improve their attack slightly. But I think where Leeds have the edge on Leigh is at the fact that their defensive prowess. They're the second best team defensively in Super League, conceding just over 12 points, whereas Leigh, I think, are conceding on average around 18 points a game. So both decent stats there, but the tail of the tape probably suggests, if Leeds are on their game defensively, they'll probably have enough to shut out the Leigh Leopards. But Leigh, as we know, are playing with confidence, and Leeds are going to have to now react with a strong performance off the back of getting beat last week. So interesting.
Scotty?
Yeah, I agree with everything Hendo said. You expect a response from Leeds after that defeat, and home advantage. I just make them slight favourites.
Moving on, this is another belter. OKR versus Wakefield. Now, I'm sure Wigan didn't take Wakefield lightly last week. I'm sure OKR wouldn't have taken Wakefield lightly anyway. But I tell you what, Scully, what a message that sent out from a Wakefield perspective going into the other top two sides.
A big message, and I know Wakefield is always a tough team to play against, because I think they always seem to raise the games playing against the better sides, and I think this is maybe something that we'll see again this week. They're coming off a great win against Wigan. That'll have bolstered their confidence so much. And we speak about Hull KR. Does their dip start this week? Who knows? And when you're constantly riding high, it's mentally challenging to stay there. And this certainly won't be an easy game. But I just think Hull KR, in the form that they are in, and up at Seal Craven Park, it's you've got to say they're favourites.
There's a fascinating battle off field here as well, I think, because Darryl Powell, he'll be absolutely loving what Wakefield did last week and the confidence that he's got in his group. He's coming up against Willie Peters in the other dugout, so to speak. He's doing such a good job at Hull KR and has that team so sharp. It'd be fascinating, I think, to see how this game plays out.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the dynamic of the game is great, because we've got two sort of sides of the spectrum here, in terms of you've got Hull Kingston Rovers now, who are playing wonderfully well, top of the tree. Are really in a good vein of form, but ultimately the pressure is on them. They're at home, they're expected to win, they're playing against a 7th place Wakefield side, but that Wakefield team go there with no pressure on them, nothing to lose. They're playing with some confidence. They're the 4th best attacking team in the competition, so they know they can ask a lot of questions with the ball, and they go there playing with an element of freedom, I guess, to some description. Whereas Hull Kingston Rovers, if Wakefield, the longer they're in the contest, and then the old, what they call the clock pressure comes in. Hull Kingston Rovers will be thinking, oh geez, because they know that there's a lot of attacking threat with Wakefield there. So I think Wakefield can go there and give a really good account of themselves. They go there with no pressure. It's a free hit for them this weekend. But the Rovers, the challenge for them is, can they handle that pressure and maintain the standards that they have currently been delivering? Makes for a great contest.
Onto a triple header of games on Saturday and a huge afternoon for Warrington. Could be a game that we circle at the end of the season as saying, one way or the other, Scully was crucial.
Yeah, and Warrington have got to start turning performances around, for Super League points, because the playoffs will be here before we know it, and just not playing well at the moment, and they're going to come up against a Hull side again, coming off a good win against Salford, who are growing in confidence. You mentioned it before about the spine of the team: Rapana, Caesar, Kate Cuss, I think, has had a new lease of life at Hull FC. And I think this is again that Hull FC will fancy, and I must admit I back Hull FC this week.
Moving on, Catalans Huddersfield. This is interesting. Catalans at home. We spoke about the improvement last time out.
Yeah.
And if we were having this conversation 3-4 weeks ago, I think they're very different. But this Huddersfield team pushed Wigan all the way, went and beat Warrington Hendo. They'll be full of confidence and full of players that, now that they've got players back from injury, can go on and really do some damage.
Totally agree. I think they go there with a lot of confidence, and I think they'll go there with belief that they can win this game. They see a wounded Catalan Dragons side at the moment. for me, I think Huddersfield at the moment, from what we've seen the last two performances, there's an element of hunger there and an element of desire to improve and turn things around. I'm yet to see that with Catland at this moment in time in recent weeks, and I think that's going to be the difference. I'm not saying we're going to see a showpiece of outstanding rugby league football on there. I think it's going to be gritty, it's going to be competitive, but I think Huddersfield have got, for me, are showing a little bit more encouragement in terms of that attitude, that hunger, the desire at the moment than Catland are, and I think that'll be the catalyst that gets them across the line this weekend.
Also Saturday, Castleford versus Wigan. Wigan will obviously go there as firm favourites. There'll be a wounded animal as well, Scully, looking to bounce back from that defeat. There will be an element of they need a performance as well as a win here.
Yeah, they do. They do need a performance, and start showing that quality performance that we used to seeing with Wigan. But I think Cass could get the backlash of that loss to Wakefield from Wigan. It's Cass is it's a tough place to go. I used to love playing at Cass. The atmosphere is electric, and I think that could bring out the best in Wigan. That intense crowd on top of you, and Cass. They're so desperate for a performance, but I think they're up against it this week.
Cass must be cursing the fixture computer that threw up Hull KR and then Wigan back to back.
Yeah, you could say that, but the reality is you've got to play these teams. Everyone's got to play these teams. So, I have to go along with Scully. I think Wigan are going to come out there this weekend very determined to right some wrongs. They haven't been nowhere near their best the last couple of weeks. They know they owe their coach a performance, and I think we'll see that they're professional enough to do that. Cass, for me, I think just need to start focusing on the smaller detail there, making sure their contact areas are improving, just getting the little effort-based areas a little bit more consistent there. But they need both teams need a performance. Both teams are desperate for a performance, but I just think Wigan will have too much quality on the night.
I suppose the reverse about kind of fixture placement could be said for St Helens, Scully, because you look at their last 4 or 5 games, they play Salford for the second time in 3 weeks. No such thing as a foregone conclusion, but let's be honest, it all points in one direction, the situation at Salford. And then all of a sudden, off the back of that performance at the weekend, they'll be looking at this going, we'll be one of the form teams of the competition if we win this.
Yeah, definitely so. And I think, as you say, this Salford game, with no disrespect to Salford, because I've loved their effort, and you've got to, give respect to Rolls and Kurt Haggerty and the job that they've done through these unbelievably testing times, but they've kept trying. It's just a lack of quality, and I think they'll come unstuck again this weekend against Saints, who come into this game fully confident now after that win with Leeds. And what Wello will be instilling in the players this week is, it's still not the prettiest on attack, but it was led by desire, by determination and effort on defence, and that kind of set the platform. They played tough. As I say, Wello was absolutely booming on Saturday with that, just with the attitude-based things. And I think if they go out with the same attitude, even more so against Salford, where you probably don't need it, I think we're going to see a big Saints performance.
Yeah. Just quickly from a Salford perspective, Hendo.
Yeah.
So much as we say about that situation, we talk about it every week, but there is a kind of, if I'm going to find a positive in all of this, and a reason why I'm still tuning in and watching the games. Sam Hill, Nathan Connell, Kai Morgan, Kobe Ruggless, who's now being given a crack in the Super League after impressing with Hunslet. There's plenty more names on that list. That they are players at the end of this season, whatever happens to the club and whatever happens with this ongoing situation, there are probably 6-7 plus players that will have a year or half a season, however long, Super League experience that will be invaluable for them. And there are players there that are impressing. Yeah,
I agree. That's a really positive way of looking at it there, Lewis. And the fact that you're right, there's some players there that are getting exposure to the elite competition, albeit may not be ready, as Scully alluded to in a previous conversation, but they're getting much needed experience and exposure to this level of competition, which will set them up for the better come next year, whether it's still at Salford because they're still around, or whether it's moving on.
I think it's something the game can learn from, because to improve as a player, you need playing opportunities. And I think our game has sometimes not alluded to that, there's not enough playing opportunities, be it losing reserve grade and what have you. But I think the amount of players that are out there that are coming through, but you don't see it until these guys play. And it's great that when, you know, a team gets forced to play young kids, and some of them take that shirt and never ever give it back. They need that opportunity to play, and I think, as you say, you know, Salford are going to create a lot of stars of the future.
Right, gents, we're out of time. Absolute pleasure as ever to have you with us. The Betfred Super League just keeps on delivering it, doesn't it? We talk about an unpredictable week last time out. I think we'll be sat in the studio again next week talking about a few more upsets. Don't forget, live rugby league action here on the Sportsman Rugby League, 2 o'clock. Wigan versus St Helens from the Betfred Women's Super League. You can have that on your big screen at 2 o'clock, and then put St Helens versus Salford on the small screen next to it, and that kicks off at 3. That's your afternoon sorted on Sunday. Gents, pleasure as ever. We'll see you on Sunday, and we will see you next week for more from The Last Tackle.
This is my time.